I'm gonna be watching when idiot cops get caught by CIA agents. That is crazy. Hold up. That is crazy. Let me see. I'm actually excited for this video.
CIA agent killed by the cops.
Oh shit.
In 2008, a shocking
Oh
incident
wow,
took
what a
place
start.
in Houston, Texas, that saw a high-speed car chase turn deadly. It all started when a Lebanese-American CIA agent named Ronald Carnaby was stopped by a police officer for speeding on State Highway 288. When the officer asked him what he did for a living, Carnaby made the fateful decision of telling the truth, that he worked for the CIA. The officer, however, was skeptical of Carnaby's story and decided to check him out on his squad car radio and computer. Unfortunately for Carnaby, the officer couldn't confirm his claims and asked him to step out of his vehicle with an imminent arrest on the horizon. Police later claimed that Carnaby failed to follow Texas law and tell the officers he had a concealed weapons permit. Instead of complying with the officer's request, Carnaby decided to make a run for it and
Yeah, that was a terrible idea. Now I'm thinking about, why don't you just go to jail or like go to the station and they could figure it out there? That was such
Carnaby failed to follow
a terrible
Texas law
idea.
and tell the officers he had a concealed weapons permit. Instead of complying with the officer's request, Carnaby decided to make a run for it and sped off, leading the cops on a dangerous high-speed chase.
Not even a very
Dashcam
fast
footage
start.
shows the chase lasted for 50 minutes and reached speeds of up to 120 miles per hour. Eventually, Carnaby's vehicle ran out of fuel and he was forced to come to a stop. Officers approached the vehicle with batons and ordered him to get out. They even broke the passenger side window with the baton. Finally, Carnaby opened his car door and emerged from the vehicle. But as he was getting out of the driver's side, he dropped his phone. When he went to pick it up, an officer came around to the front of the vehicle with his gun drawn and shot him in the back. Carnaby died with his face flat on the pavement as he bled out for 12 minutes before he was rushed to the hospital. After the incident, the police force seemed divided in what they should say to the public about what happened. Internal Affairs conducted an investigation and claimed that the shooting was justified and that the officers involved acted according to what they thought the situation demanded from them. The police officers union also said that the officers were put in a situation where they had to make some split-second judgment calls. We feel that the judgment calls they made were the correct calls. We certainly intend on appealing the discipline, said Gary Blankenship, HPOU. However, the officer responsible for pulling the trigger, Charles Foster, would still be held responsible for violating police conduct and behavior, according to the Internal Affairs report. The union also said that despite the violations, they will stand by their officers and will represent them in an appeal against the Internal Affairs findings. Former officers like Tommy Nixon, however, have a different take on the situation. He felt that the situation could have been handled better by the officers. He also said that police training instructs officers to create distance, find cover, use the PA system, take shelter behind their vehicle, and attract the suspect's attention. He even went so far as to say, "I can assure you that their careers at the department, for all intents and purposes, are over." Foster, in his defense, claimed that the department's limited training on high-risk stops didn't adequately prepare him for the confrontation. In his deposition, he explained that the training occurred in a classroom at a police academy and only used chairs to simulate passengers sitting in a stopped vehicle. However, the story didn't end there. In 2010, the case went to the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans. It was brought in by Susan Carnaby, a Houston school teacher who was married to Ronald Carnaby. The case was about the officer's conduct and the department's training procedures, where Mrs. Carnaby argued that the use of deadly force violated her husband's constitutional right to be free from unreasonable seizure. Now, a federal judge had already dismissed the case in 2009, saying that the officers were in fear for their lives and hadn't done anything wrong. But Susan kept fighting in the courts. She argued that the officers hadn't been properly trained on how to deal with high-risk situations like this, and that they should have approached Ronald's car differently. If they had, she and her attorney argued, they wouldn't have felt like they had to use deadly force. If the proper procedure—
That is true. If they were taught, especially if he said, right, you would usually want to keep that in mind, that he was a CIA agent, but then you would also want to take cover so he wouldn't shoot you. But I guess if one of them wasn't in cover and he was coming around the car and then he seen him reach for his phone and then he shot him. That is
were followed. Carnaby would have gotten out of the vehicle and put his hands on his back. He'd be alive today, said Kellenen, attorney of Mrs. Carnaby. Susan wanted an injunction to force the Houston Police Department to change the way they handled these high-risk situations. But the city's attorney, Dave Feldman, remained firm on his position, saying that there was no evidence of the officers doing anything wrong. We feel very comfortable with our position in high-risk situations. But the city's attorney, Dave Feldman—
They said sex female. Residence unknown.
Remained firm on his position, saying that there was no evidence of the officers doing anything wrong. We feel very comfortable with our position in the case and on appeal, Feldman said. Obviously, it's unfortunate anytime a citizen is injured and killed, but the record demonstrated these officers acted reasonably under the circumstance, and there was no constitutional violations or any violations of Mr. Carnaby's rights. The case was eventually settled out of court for an undisclosed sum. As for Officer Clark, he continued to work for the Houston Police Department after the shooting. But what's truly shocking about this whole thing is the CIA's repeated denial of having any connection with Ronald Carnaby. While we do not, as a rule, publicly deny or confirm employment, I will tell you in this case that Mr. Carnaby was not an employee of the Central Intelligence Agency. CIA spokesman Paul Gimgliano told the Houston Chronicle he was never a CIA officer. However, there was tons of evidence that said otherwise. According to Callanan, Ronald Carnaby had done a lot of work for the FBI, the Secret Service, and the CIA. He even headed up the Houston branch of the Association of Former Intelligence Officers. Ronald had plaques honoring his years of service to the agency, and he even had a book written by former CIA Director George Tenet with a personal inscription. Even moments prior to his shooting.
Imagine dedicating your whole life to that job, and then when you pass away, they say you weren't even a part of them. You weren't even working there. That is crazy.
Director George Tenet with a personal inscription. Even moments prior to his shooting, while the police were still on his tail, Ronald tried to call some of his contacts in the Houston Police Department and the FBI to vouch for him, regardless of the outcome of this case. Ronald Carnaby ended up losing his life because of some questionable moves by the officers who were on the job, and nothing will ever make up for that. In the next story, I cover the case of an alleged CIA agent who was arrested for a shooting incident on the I-95 highway. Number 2, CIA agent arrested for shooting drivers on the highway. On a Sunday morning in 2021, a bizarre shooting spree occurred along Interstate 95 in Martin County, Florida. A man pulled into the weigh station with a gunshot wound to his stomach. Soon after, an off-duty Riviera police officer saw a crashed car and a bloodied man came running out of the bushes. The officer ordered him to the ground at gunpoint. According to sheriff's reports, at around 6 a.m., emergency responders got to the northbound weigh station on I-95, 3 miles south of Bridge Road, where the wounded man had pulled over. While on I-95 about 14 miles north, a Riviera Beach police officer traveling in that direction found a car that had seemingly crashed. Moments later, a man came running from the bushes. The man, later identified as Aaron Fedokovich of Ocala, had fired shots at passing vehicles while driving north on I-95, claiming that he believed they were part of the mafia. He had sustained what investigators believed to be self-inflicted gunshot wound to his right forearm. Fedukovich also told investigators that he had thrown his gun in the bushes. Fedukovich claimed to be an undercover CIA agent investigating the mafia in Miami. He said that he was driving back to Jacksonville on I-95 when a semi-truck drove next to him. He thought the vehicle was part of the mafia, so he shot at it for protection. Investigators said that Fedukovich fired shots at several vehicles, and one shot ended up penetrating the door of the 59-year-old man, wounding him. Fedukovich had a 9mm pistol magazine in his pocket and told investigators he needed to get his gun to protect deputies because the mafia is on their way and he has a tracking device in his stomach. According to Chief Deputy John Budensiak, the investigators believe that Fedukovich could be experiencing mental illness or drug-induced mental illness. To prevent him from getting access to firearms, steps have been taken. Fedukovich will also receive a mental health evaluation under the state's Baker Act. Although Fedukovich will face charges, investigators believe that aggravated battery, as opposed to attempted murder, is the appropriate charge. They looked at intent, and after interviewing him, they didn't feel like he intended to murder someone. Budensiak said, "The state will decide whether to move him."
I understand that he might have not been in the best mental state, but he was trying to kill that person. I'm not gonna lie to you. He thought they were the mafia, so he's fighting for his life on his, like, rightfully so. But he did obviously mean to kill that person to protect himself.
Attempted murder is the appropriate charge.
But of course, they mean like
after interviewing him specific. They didn't feel like he intended to murder someone. Budensiak said, "The state will decide whether to move him over to the mental health court or take the criminal route once they have all the facts." Fedukovich was held on a $75,000 bond in the St. Lucie County Jail on an aggravated battery charge. If you want to support the channel, please subscribe.
That was honestly a pretty good video. Make sure to drop a like and subscribe and come to the Twitch, which I'm live right now in. And I'll see you in the next video.
Now it's my time. I gotta make up for all them nights that my mama cried. I'm going in, I'm putting everything on the line. Dropped out of school to chase my dream, I had something for the proof. I put my all into this shit, man, I can't fucking lose. They smile up in my face, but they don't know what I've been through.